Or do you think she is?
I don't know. I'm dying to know. And to tell you the truth, I think it would benefit you to get it off because you're not a criminal.
No, you're not.
No. You gotta tell me. Beat me up.
I could give you a scenario.
Yes. Give me a scenario.
I ask a guy that picks up dumpsters behind, like Wendy's, Burger King.
Yeah.
I said, what do you do with that trash?
Yeah.
He said, take it to the dump.
Oh, you put her in the dumpster.
But I didn't kill her. Actually, I kind of did.
Yeah, kinda.
Kind of.
Yeah.
I kind of did.
Yeah.
I was at the station and I was doing some paperwork, and a gentleman walked in and he was requesting a supervisor. Brian Heisler said that his main concern was where his sister was.
Brian said a day or two earlier he'd gotten a phone call from Phil and said that Roberta had passed away in Memphis, Tennessee, about 750 miles from Hartville, Ohio.
Philip told him that Roberta had passed away in the vehicle, and two EMS personnel took her body and said that they were going to take her to the coroner's office. And then Philip left and came home without Roberta's body. So Brian was definitely very upset and just wondering what happened.
My brother-in-law's name is Phil Snyder.
And then her name was?
Roberta. She goes by Bobby. They've lived in Hartville their whole lives. So we call the other family members and everything. His story is, it's changed 3 times now. Originally, they were in a parking lot to go into the hotel, and she collapsed. At first, he says he called an ambulance. Well, now, just a few minutes ago, one of his sons called and said that he called the coroner's office in Memphis. They have no record of anything. So when we asked him again about it, now he said he didn't call an ambulance. There happened to be an ambulance in the parking lot.
Okay.
The other part of the story is supposedly he had her cremated and left the ashes down there and came home.
Okay. So where is he at now?
He's back home. He's back here. He won't tell us nothing. He won't tell. Who cremates a body the very next day and then leaves the ashes there and comes home?
I don't know. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me whatsoever.
Yesterday would have been her 70th birthday.
Okay. How old's he?
Phil would be about 72 or 73. They've been married for 53 years. I'm not angry. I don't know. I just want him.
You just want answers.
I don't want to accuse him, and I'm not. But he's got to tell us something.
Yeah, and I agree.
And the story's got to start to make sense at some point.
I ended up speaking with the chief because the situation just didn't make sense, and there was definitely more to the story.
If the story that Philip told was true, that she passed away of natural causes in Memphis, that would not be a crime. But not knowing where her body is, now it's a crime. Because you have to properly care for the corpse. Especially if you're out of state and you have a death like that, there would have to be an autopsy. Sergeant said, so what are we going to do? And I said, we're going to find her.
Roberta was friends with my grandmother. They lived in the same neighborhood. When I first met Roberta, she was shy and, reserved, kind of keeping herself. But when Phil wasn't around, she would open up. She was very uplifting and very kind. She was gentle, but she could put her foot in the ground if she really needed to. So she could stand her ground. I got to know her through playing cards. Euchre. Roberta really helped me understand the game. She may not have always shown it, but deep down she had a competitive edge. I feel like she would bring a smile to your face because she would remind me of, my grandma.
Our decision was to interview him at his home so he would feel more comfortable. My goal was to get him to open up and explain what happened to his wife, so I wanted to act like I didn't know that she was missing.
Are you Phil?
Yeah.
Do you mind if I step in for a second?
Sure, good morning.
How you doing?
Doing good.
Good. Hey, we had some calls from family members, and they just wanted us to come out and check and make sure you're okay on you and your wife. You guys okay?
I'm okay, yes.
Okay.
My wife passed away
Okay, when did that happen?
the 6th.
The 6th of
Yeah.
January?
Yeah. We went down to Memphis to see Elvis's down there, and she choked on her phlegm. She'd been choking for about a year.
Okay.
And she wanted to go down one more time before she died. I think she knew she was going to die.
Okay. So this happened down in Memphis then?
Yeah.
So she was choking on her phlegm and there was an ambulance or?
Well, these guys were there, and they was checking on someone, and they didn't need any help. I said, "Can you help me? My wife is having a very bad problem." And they said, said she was gone.
Okay.
She had passed away.
Where'd they transport her to?
I'm not sure where.
During that interview, there was an uneasy feeling because I know if that was me, I would definitely not be home when my wife's body is somewhere else.
So where's your wife now? What happened to her?
They took her to a place where they cremate people.
Okay, and you don't know where that is either?
No. They said I didn't need to stay. If I wanted to, I could just go ahead and go home.
Even though I spoke with him, he still wasn't giving a lot of answers to help us find Roberta.
And in this day and age, you can't just drop a body off with some paramedics who are down in Memphis, Tennessee, and not know where they took her or what they did with her.
But I'm okay, as I can be. I'm glad you stopped, though.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a tragic.
It's a bitch. Life is a bitch.
Can be sometimes.
Yeah.
If you need anything, let us know, okay?
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I still felt that there was more to this story.
Me too.
And obviously we need to get to the bottom of it to figure out where she is so we can give the answers to the family. I contacted the coroner, contacted multiple EMS agencies, multiple hospitals in the general area, and there was nothing matching that name or description of Roberta. I thought the plot was thickening, and it was definitely getting weirder by the second. At this point, I believe there might be some foul play involved.
I realized that we needed to go in and search the house because she could be laying dead in there. She could be alive in there. We don't know anything other than what Phil said. And if I would have interviewed him at the station, I wouldn't have the ability to ask him to let me search the house so easily.
I went down. She wanted to go.
This is Andy Boyce, by the way. He's one of our police.
Nice to meet you, sir. How are you doing?
How do you do?
It's good.
Anyway, she wanted to go to the Grace one time before she passed away. She wasn't feeling it.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you have any receipts from that hotel or anything to show?
Yes, sir. Okay. Let me go get one.
Yeah, if you don't mind. Sir, can I ask a favor of you?
Yes.
We really have to cover all of our bases. So would it be okay while you get the receipt, if Officer Boyce would just go through your house just to make sure that your wife isn't here? He won't go through any drawers or anything, but just to look to make sure that she's not.
Shoes are clean.
I think so.
We didn't know if she was dead or alive. The purpose was to make sure that she wasn't in there or there wasn't some blood-soaked area on the floor.
We've got so much stuff in the basement.
We walked all through his house.
I couldn't tell. I thought something was there. I thought there was something hidden. You can look with the flashlight, like down in that gap.
You guys slept with Ramona. Did she have a good night's sleep? Was she up coughing all night?
No, she might not go to sleep till midnight.
Okay. And then she'd
But
sleep in?
I would give her a pill.
Okay.
Then I got her going around 9:30, 10.
But you left Sparta, the Ramada in Sparta, Kentucky. And she was alive when you left Sparta.
Yes.
He lacked compassion. If my wife is missing, I have a little more concern about her whereabouts.
Sure. We go back upstairs?
Yes.
So my gut reaction to this whole thing is he killed her, and he's going to do everything in his power to not divulge that he killed her. I decided I was going to start pushing him a little bit.
Well, let's hold on a minute here. See, I've been a policeman for a long time. For many, many years. I was a CVSA examiner, which is kind of like a lie detector test. What I can tell you is that your story doesn't make a lot of sense because a dead body is a very, very serious issue. So, sir, it's time for you to tell us what you haven't told us so far.
I've told you everything I can tell you.
I was testing him because I didn't know to what degree I could push him, and keeping him comfortable with me was very important.
We are really good at what we do, and if we spend hours collectively, lots of hours trying to figure this out, and we still don't know, then we're missing something.
If I can think of something, I will call you. If I can think of anything. We'll put that picture over here.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Later that day, I reached out to the hotel manager in Sparta, Kentucky. The room that Philip got that night was underneath the camera. And the desk where he checked in had a camera. And he said, "Chief, there was no couple. It was just him."
At this point, where is Roberta? The hotel was not that far out of the state of Ohio.
And that was the first real concrete evidence we had that she did not get to Memphis.
Sit down.
How you doing?
I'm doing as good as
You look tired, man.
as good as I can do, I guess. So I was laying down trying to take a nap.
My goal was to confront him because I wanted to see how he would react. Why didn't she go into the Ramada Inn?
Why didn't she go in?
Yeah.
She did.
Who checked in?
I did.
Where was she?
In the truck.
And then what happened there?
And then we went in and went into the room.
Okay. Well, Ramada Inn documents that you were the only person that checked in. And on all of their video footage, your wife is not seen.
She was there.
Look, I'm going to show you something here. That's you checking into the monitor. Yes. Okay. That's you going into room 201.
Yes.
That's you as you're leaving room 201.
Okay.
There's no Roberta. That's a still picture taken from a video.
She was there.
But that's not what the video showed. You can almost see it unfolding in front of you, how he dips into an emotional state. He's caught in our crossfires at this moment. I was concerned he could come out with a weapon of some sort. I was literally prepared to take out my firearm and shoot him. I didn't know if he would be a threat to himself or a threat to us. You can see my right hand was sitting on my sidearm, just in case he came around the corner with anything aggressive.
When he started to come out, we didn't know what he had or what he was doing, so we were ready for anything. But I believe he literally went to the bedroom just to collect his thoughts so he could come out and just give us another story.
Here's the situation, Phil. We fully believe that your wife had a significant medical condition. And we fully believe that she died. The rest of it we don't believe.
Okay.
First of all, you don't want your kids to think you did something
I
wrong.
didn't do anything. I didn't do anything.
Well, then where is she? And what you don't want to have happen.
But I've been married to her for 53 years, and I love her.
And here's the situation. The law says you're not allowed to lie to us and make us work real hard to prove that. It's a
You
crime.
gonna take me to jail?
Well, let me finish.
Are you
Okay?
gonna take me to jail?
I don't want to, no.
If I tell you that I put her in the Tennessee River, will you take me to jail?
Well, no, but we gotta go to the Tennessee River and look for her.
I didn't do nothing to her. It was on the way home. I put her in. I was just barely able to lift her up and throw her over the edge. And I put her in the river. And the current took her away.
So why did you throw her into the river?
I wanted her to be safe with nature. And I figured if she went downstream, no one would be able to find her. I can bring the map down.
We'll go with you. Let me ask you this. Did she die with natural causes? If you didn't do anything, why did you throw her in the river?
I don't know. I was in shock. I don't know. I don't remember.
We went down, we looked at maps with Phil. I definitely was mixed about it because he was a very, very good liar. I didn't think that she was in the river, but once he stuck to that story, we have to disprove it, or we have to prove it. Take care. He brought out a helicopter and boats and all-terrain vehicles to go along the shorelines, and he conducted a good search.
But we never found the body.
His spontaneous actions told me we're touching a nerve that's causing him to try to dig his way out of it. We decided we were going to come back the next day with a cadaver dog to go through the house.
Do you mind if I follow behind, or do you want? Okay.
As we entered the residence, you could tell the cadaver dog really wanted to go in a specific direction. We ended up going into the basement, and Canine Jet bolted directly for a red bin that was located under a table.
He is looking at a red bin.
All right, so we got this area here. It could be something. It could be this. It could be this. I mean,
This could have been in the truck when. Yeah.
Watch when I smell. You'll be able to smell it. I'm gonna leave like that.
Oh yeah, I can smell something.
Something's in there. Maybe real quick and see how if it's okay if you and I go through it, or he wants me to take it.
As soon as you opened the red bin, you could smell a very distinct odor.
There's no body here, but there's a very bad smell in this tote. It's got Christmas decorations in it.
There were what appeared to be stains of blood. And in the bottom of that tub was a white plastic bag. And inside that white plastic bag was the front of a sweatshirt that had been cut off that said Hartville, Ohio, USA.
I believe he definitely cut off for a reason, because that's going to indicate exactly where she was from.
I had a conversation with our coroner. Unfortunately, she said, look, if there was more blood, I might be able to say, yes, this is a homicide. But it was just little specks, little stains of blood here and there, and that was frustrating. We needed to find the body of Roberta Snyder. We found out he used Roberta's credit card on the way to and from Graceland.
And the first stop on this journey was in Worcester, Ohio,
which is an hour away from Hartville, Ohio, and he filled up with gas.
So I contacted the general manager of the store and asked her to review video from that date.
And that video shows Phil pulling in, but there's nobody in the passenger seat. It's just Phil, all by himself.
That obviously tells me that she was not in the vehicle 40 minutes from his residence.
I have never before interviewed a murder suspect in a psych ward in a hospital. But after getting some assurances from the staff there, we went ahead and did it. This really isn't any different than the conversations we've had in the past.
Okay.
Doesn't matter what you say without arresting him.
Okay.
You know, you're going to stay here in their care,
Okay.
no matter where this conversation goes.
Okay.
Okay? So she was alive when you left your home.
Yes.
Okay. So why do we have video of you pulling into the Bell store in Worcester on January the 4th, and you're the only person in your truck?
I don't know. I don't know.
Well, no, you have to know, because you were the only person in your truck. Here's your truck. I don't have the video, but I got pictures. There's your truck in Worcester, Ohio, about noon on January 4th, and there's nobody in your truck with you. So
I don't know. She didn't die. She didn't die at home. She died en route.
Well, you know how far from your home Worcester is?
No.
Not very. So you're telling me that she got into the truck in the garage, and somewhere between your home and Worcester, she died and you threw her in the back of the truck?
No.
I'm not telling you that at all.
Okay. Well, explain this to me. When you threw her in the river, what was she wearing?
She had blue sweats and a blue shirt. And I didn't throw her. I laid her.
Phil, why'd you cut off her shirt?
I didn't. Where was this at?
Phil, why'd you cut off her shirt?
I didn't. Where's that at?
In your basement.
No, that's something that she's done.
No.
I didn't do that.
It was in that red bin under that table, Phil. I believe you cut it off because it said Hartville, Ohio, and if anybody found her, that's that missing lady from Hartville, Ohio. That's why you cut the front of the shirt off of her.
I don't remember cutting any shirt off of anybody.
Okay, my plan is pretty simple. I'm going to go to the grand jury, and I'm going to explain to them that your wife is dead. We found her decomposing tissue in your basement.
I didn't cut the shirt. I didn't cut any shirt off.
Well, the science says that's not true.
I didn't harm my wife.
Okay. Well, then, if that's the truth, why aren't we talking about what really happened? Listen,
I don't want to continue this.
So, is this where you want to leave it? That you're just not going to say anything more? That we're not going to find Roberta?
They'll find her in the Tennessee River. They'll find her.
Well, we've been looking. We've been looking since the 11th, and we haven't found her yet. Which, given your history of being deceptive, not being truthful with us, is a strong indication that she really didn't go in the Tennessee River.
I don't know what to say.
He knew we were getting very close to being able to prove what he did, and he didn't want to play ball anymore. But he never said, I want a lawyer. He never said anything that would prohibit us from further investigating. I was interviewing a couple people for positions in my police department, and Joan Bauer is a rock star police officer, and we hired her.
I talked to the chief about this case because it was all over the news. I asked him, hey, can I take a crack at this? You know, undercover, that is my background. The chief was like, yeah, let's give it a crack. They showed me a picture of him, but I did not read any police reports, so I could develop the undercover person that I needed to be without being biased. I started doing surveillance, and he made it pretty easy for me to get a pattern very quickly. At lunchtime, I observed his truck at a local fast food restaurant, and I went in. There was a lady sitting at a booth next to me, so I positioned myself so that I could put the camera on him, and I began to talk rather loudly to the lady. I gave my story that I was in town taking care of my sick mother.
Oh, that's the thing. I'm really sort of bored.
Oh, it's really neat. You should just go out there just to experience it because it's a really, really
I will
place.
definitely do that.
right after I had pretty much laid out why I'm in this small town. He meets with a friend and he moves his seat closer to where I'm sitting. Yeah, I'm staying with her.
Help her out.
Yeah, but I can't stand the lady who helps her during the day. So I always say, I got stuff to do, so I'm just like doing nothing.
So when you going back to Cincinnati?
I don't know. Hopefully, I mean, she's pretty sick. It sounds horrible, but not till she goes. You can see that he looks away and he lost interest during that. So in the beginning, I'm deciding how I'm going to mold the character to befriend him. Hi, how are you?
You the girl over there at Wendy's?
Yeah, last week. Yeah.
Where you over here?
Huh?
Different restaurant.
Different restaurant. Yeah, I can't go to the same one every day. Just trying to get out, but it's so beautiful. Somebody said that there's a park around too. All right. What's your name?
Cool.
I'm Missy.
Missy?
Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Again. I know. Well, it's nice to have somebody to talk to around here, let me tell you. He did appear to be somewhat lonely. So I created the person who just needs to hang out and talk during the day. So I'm going to take a drive by and check that out. Thanks.
Where's the property?
On Waterloo Road?
Are you going to go to the Y right now?
Yeah. I got the
Artificial room?
She does, but she doesn't use it. He believed I was just liking him for who he was, and then it started with his wanting to help me take care of my mother. He told me how I should kill her, and then if I did, to call him, and he would come help me. And from there, I started to change the script and ask him more about himself. He said, my wife died not too long ago, and I pretty much acted like I was surprised. It seemed like I was getting closer to the truth and what he did to Roberta. He called me and asked if I would meet him 10 miles from Hartville, and he explained he wanted to tell me more about Roberta. He did not want people to hear.
Where do you think she is?
I don't know. I'm dying to know. And to tell you the truth, I think it would benefit you to get it off because you're not a criminal.
No, you're not.
No.
I had to be really careful because this was a form of interrogation that had to be done gently.
You gotta tell me. Beat me up.
I could give you a scenario.
Yes. Give me a scenario.
I ask a guy that picks up dumpsters behind like Wendy's, Burger King.
Yeah.
I said, what do you do with that trash?
Yeah.
He said, take it to the dump.
I'm not real smart. So, you put her in the dumpster. Oh, then she's buried 10 feet deep in garbage now. They won't find her. There's no way.
Just a scenario.
I know. So just a scenario. How long does it take for a body to decompose?
A year. But she might not be in garbage. She might be in Tennessee.
No, come on. Okay. You love to tease with me, don't you?
I don't know. Why do we trust each other so much?
I don't know. I think because we're a lot alike, probably. You think?
I don't know. It's like I've known you
I know.
30 years.
I know. Today's date is April 20th, year 2018.
I did have a feeling that we were right on the cusp. He felt like no one trusted him.
Well, morning.
And I created just a person that wouldn't judge him. I went into the restaurant.
How are you?
I'm good.
Did you bring your cards?
I did.
He was a lot more relaxed than he had ever been. It was like we were long lost friends, and right away I could tell that he was going to tell me the truth.
I want to know what drove you. I want to know what drives Phil.
I had had enough. I had enough.
Were you fighting, or it was just like...
It was a pretty good argument the night before.
Yeah.
But I didn't kill her. Actually, I kind of did.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
I kind of did.
Yeah.
The video recorder died like right at that time, but I did have the backup audio device going. It was very eerie, and you could almost like see it peel off of him. The stress of just carrying it all this time.
Say I get ill,
Yes.
or they take me to jail.
They're not taking me to jail.
Say they do.
Okay.
I want you to get your attorney
Mm-hmm.
to come and marry us.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes. Oh. So you could tell me anything, and then they can't make a spouse testify against a spouse.
Duh. Would be a marriage of convenience.
I have a good attorney down in Cincinnati. That's all I can do. However, you have to tell me how she fell out.
That was a shock. And I had to roll with it. I knew that from then I had to get the confession that day. And so I was able to push him with, if I agree to do something like that, you have to trust me enough to tell me, everything.
Can you imagine a hammer this big and this big around?
Did you bonk her in the head?
Maybe. Scenario-wise, maybe.
So, was she sleeping when you hit her in the head, or were you fighting?
She was asleep.
Yeah,
Just a scenario.
right. On the couch?
Just a scenario.
Or were you worried about the couch having blood on it?
I didn't care.
Right.
It was a love scene.
Okay. Front of the head? Side of the head?
Just a scenario.
Oh, yes.
Right there.
Right.
Oh,
But was there, like, I can imagine it going,
no.
no?
Just a scenario.
Yeah.
You can buy these. It's like a claw. It's like a wash rag, but I gently laid one of those on the side of her head.
Before. So it just took one hit? And that was it?
And that was it.
It was a full confession. He used his hands as visuals for how he killed her and just laid it out there for me to pretty much accept it.
Does it feel good to tell someone?
It feels real good.
Yeah.
I needed that.
I knew then that I had him. However, I did not know whether I had it on the audio or the video. So I left it with him that we would meet later that day.
We agreed to meet down at the FBI office so that we could all hear it and decide whether or not this was indeed a confession.
But I didn't kill her. Actually, I kind of did.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
I kind of did.
Yeah.
When I heard Phil Snyder, I'm thinking that we got you, Phil. We finally got you. And I told the chief, it's time, go arrest him.
I got my camera.
Step up. You're kidding. Step up.
We entered the restaurant and he was in disbelief that we had a warrant for him.
Right up until he got his handcuffs put on. He thought for sure he had fooled us.
There you go.
He took him to Bullitt, Kentucky, and showed him a dumpster that he claimed to have put Roberta's body in.
We tracked down where the landfill was. And we went out there and we watched the 200,000-pound bulldozer leveling everything. It compresses everything. So she's somewhere in that 500 by 500 foot grid out there, anywhere up to 25 feet below the surface. But we just didn't have $15 million that would allow us to bring her back for proper burial.
We thought we could come up with more for the family, but that was the end of the line. That was very sad.
We said a prayer for her, and we left. It's not a happy ending for anybody, but there's bad people in the world, and we need intuitive cops to conduct these interviews and to be flexible with how they deal with people to bring justice to a case, justice to a family.
I thought we lost somebody that you could look to and could learn a lot from. I would love to tell her thank you, because she was always kind and treated me with respect. It will always stick with me. I'm glad I got to meet her, and I'm glad that she was a part of my life.
The call came in before sunrise, a brittle ring slicing through the quiet of a Midwest morning, and the sound carried the weight of years the way cold carries through bone. A deputy lifted the receiver in a station that smelled of stale coffee and floor wax, and the voice on the other end did not bother with greetings. It said there was something wrong at the edge of town, something old and newly exposed, something that did not belong to the present. By the time the receiver settled back into its cradle, a phrase that had not been spoken aloud in decades hovered in the air like breath on glass. Cold case. Midwest. 1983. The past had found a way to knock. 39 years earlier, the town had woken to frost and sirens, to the uneasy sense that a line had been crossed. The fields were bare then, harvested down to stubble, the land open and unforgiving under a low gray sky. It was a morning meant for routine, for clocks and coffee and the predictable rhythm of work. The victim left home before dawn, boots crunching on gravel, breath white in the dark, a wave at the door that would be remembered too well later. By mid-morning, a pickup sat abandoned near the tracks, driver's door open, keys still dangling, radio murmuring a weather report to no one. No sign of a struggle, no blood, just the absence of a person who was supposed to come back. Searchers moved fast at first because that is what you do when hope is still possible. Volunteers lined the roads, names shouted into the wind, dogs pulling against their leashes as if they could drag answers out of the frozen ground. The sheriff, younger then, paced with a notebook and a knot in his stomach, watching the clock with the sense that time was already slipping away. By late afternoon they found the body, and nothing about it fit neatly into place. The location was wrong, tucked behind an industrial building near an old grain elevator, a place the victim had no reason to be. The injuries told a story without a clear beginning or end. Violence without a witness. Death without a clean explanation. Photographs were taken under harsh light. Measurements recorded. Notes scribbled. The coroner chose words that hedged and qualified. Careful language that acknowledged uncertainty without resolving it. The case file began to swell with paper. Each page a promise that answers were coming. The headlines hit hard and fast. Midwest town rocked by killing. Police hunt for clues. Community in shock. And then the days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and the promises thinned. Leads came in frantic and contradictory. A man seen near the tracks. A car idling too long. A scream that might have been the wind. Each thread frayed under pressure. Alibis held. Suspicions shifted. Winter covered what little there was to read in the dirt. By spring, the case had cooled in the way only unresolved violence can cool. Not into peace but into a quiet ache. The sheriff boxed files and put them on a shelf he told himself he would return to. The victim's family learned how to speak in careful sentences. How to live with anniversaries that felt like open doors to rooms no one entered anymore. The town learned a different kind of vigilance, one that lived in locked doors and sideways looks. Cold case became a phrase people used without meeting each other's eyes. What no one knew then was that something important had been sitting in plain sight, catalogued and dismissed, a detail too small for the tools of the time. It had been photographed, bagged, labeled, and then quietly relegated to the background. In 1983, the question that would make it matter had not yet been invented. Technology was not ready. The truth waited. It waited through the 80s and 90s, through a new millennium, through changes in uniforms and letterhead. It waited as the town shrank, as storefronts emptied and kids who had grown up with the story left for places where the past felt lighter. It waited as the building near the elevator rusted and sagged, repurposed and neglected, its walls holding secrets by accident rather than design. It waited while memories softened and names blurred. It waited because it had to. The call that broke the waiting did not come from a detective chasing ghosts. It came from a contractor doing demolition work, tearing into old structures with no patience for history. A panel gave way where it shouldn't have, revealing a space that did not belong to the original plans. Inside were items wrapped in oilcloth, preserved by dust and chance. The contractor hesitated, a feeling crawling up his spine that this was not scrap. He made the call. By the time deputies arrived, the sun was up and the air tasted of metal and rot. Gloves snapped on. Phones came out. Photographs were taken with a care that felt reverent. Some of what lay in that hidden space was immediately recognizable to anyone who had ever held the old file. Other pieces made stomachs drop. Someone said the victim's name softly, as if saying it louder might wake something. Someone else said cold case louder now with a different edge. This was not rumor or memory. This was physical. This could be tested. Back at the station, the old file came down from the shelf. Pages crackled. Photographs stared back with the flat insistence of the past. Names leaped out, familiar and suddenly charged with new meaning. The evidence from the elevator was logged and sealed, then sent away to a lab that did not exist in 1983, to machines that could read what once looked like noise. The waiting that followed was different from the waiting decades earlier. It was taut, humming, filled with the sense that something irrevocable was approaching. When the results came back, they did not creep. They struck. The material told a story of presence and contact that cut through old assumptions like a blade. Timelines shifted. Alibis bent. A name that had once been peripheral moved to the center, dragging disbelief with it. Investigators worked with a focus sharpened by the years they could not get back. Interviews were scheduled. Doors were knocked. Faces aged by time reacted in ways cameras recorded without mercy. Surprise that cracked into anger. Laughter that sounded wrong. Silence that stretched too long. News spread carefully at first, then all at once. Midwest 1983 cold case reopened. Hidden evidence discovered. Community stunned. People who had grown up with the story found themselves seeing it anew. The way a familiar photograph looks different when you learn who took it. Old friendships were re-examined. Old loyalties tested. The victim's family was notified. Hope and dread tangling in their voices. They had learned not to trust promises, but this felt different. This felt like substance. A press conference was called, microphones clustering where there had once been none. Officials spoke in measured tones, careful to separate evidence from conclusion, but their faces betrayed the magnitude. This was not a theory. This was data. This was a rewrite. The phrase cold case solved hovered just out of reach, tempting and dangerous, because solving something that has been unsolved for nearly 4 decades carries its own violence. It forces a reckoning not just with a crime, but with the ways people failed to see what was in front of them. As night fell, lights burned in houses across town. Phones rang. Social feeds filled with fragments of disbelief and accusation. At the edge of the cemetery, someone left fresh flowers on a grave that had known too many winters, their color stark against the dull grass. The wind moved through empty fields, carrying with it the sense that the past had finally found a voice loud enough to be heard. The town felt the first true tremor of what it meant to reopen a Midwest 1983 cold case, to let hidden evidence speak, and to accept that once the truth steps into the light, it does not ask permission to change everything. The morning after the lab results arrived, the town woke with a nervous energy that felt unfamiliar, a hum beneath the routine sounds of traffic and morning radio, because the past had stopped being abstract and started to breathe again. Investigators moved through the day with purpose sharpened by caution, aware that every step now mattered in ways it hadn't before. The evidence was real, but it was also fragile, a bridge between decades that could collapse under the wrong pressure. In a conference room with no windows, the file lay open again, not as a relic but as a living document, its margins crowded with new notes written in steadier hands. The name at the center of the new findings was not unknown. It was a name that had appeared before, lightly once or twice, then slipped away under the weight of stronger suspects and louder theories. In 1983, it had not stood out. It belonged to someone who fit easily into the town's background, someone present without being remarkable, someone who knew the roads and the rhythms, who had reason to be near the places now under scrutiny. Back then, the connection had felt thin, circumstantial. Now, with the lab's quiet certainty, it felt heavy. Detectives reconstructed the day again, hour by hour, minute by minute, peeling back assumptions that had calcified into fact. The victim's last known movements were mapped with precision, times cross-referenced, statements reread with a new kind of skepticism. What had once been taken at face value was now questioned. Why that route? Why that delay? Why the detour that led toward the tracks? The pickup truck, abandoned and silent, took on a different significance when paired with the new data. It wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a scene. Witnesses were contacted, some for the first time in decades, others for the first time since their original statements. The calls were delicate, each one a reopening of old doors. Some voices shook with age and emotion, memories tumbling out in fragments, details resurfacing that had seemed too small to mention before. Others were guarded, careful, as if the years had taught them that words could be dangerous. Investigators listened more than they spoke, letting silence do its work. In those pauses, truth and fear often sounded the same. One interview stood out early, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. The man sat with his hands folded, eyes fixed on a spot on the table, answering questions with a practiced calm that felt rehearsed. His timeline was smooth, too smooth, sliding neatly over the rough edges the evidence now exposed. When confronted with specifics, he adjusted without hesitation, details shifting like sand underfoot. It wasn't proof, but it was a signal. The room felt smaller as the interview ended, the air heavier. Outside the station, word continued to spread, filtered through whispers and half-formed headlines. Midwest town revisits old killing. New forensic evidence. Possible suspect identified. People who had once been children during the original investigation now found themselves explaining the case to their own kids, their voices carrying a mix of authority and uncertainty. The town had grown used to the idea that some questions never get answers. This challenged that comfort. The victim's family was brought in again, this time not to receive condolences but information. They sat across from investigators who chose their words carefully, aware of the fragile balance between hope and harm. Photographs were shown, not the old ones but new images of items recovered, evidence that had waited patiently for science to catch up. The family's reactions moved through disbelief to anger to a quiet, trembling focus. They asked the same questions they had asked decades earlier, but now there were responses that did not end in apologies. Not answers yet, but direction. As the investigation deepened, the physical spaces of the case were revisited. The grain elevator loomed like a scar on the landscape, its rusted sides catching the light in ways that felt accusatory. Investigators walked the perimeter, imagining it as it had been, busier, louder, more alive, trying to see what someone in 1983 might have seen. Distances were measured again. Lines of sight recalculated. The place where the body had been found was no longer just a memory. It was a problem to solve. The hidden compartment that had yielded the evidence was examined with forensic obsession. Why it existed? Who knew about it? How often it had been accessed? Old blueprints were pulled, maintenance records reviewed, names surfaced, some long forgotten. Each discovery narrowed the field, tightening the focus until the edges of the investigation began to blur into a single point. It was not certainty yet, but it was momentum, and momentum in a cold case feels like a kind of violence pushing against years of stillness. The suspect was approached again, this time with more on the table. The interview room was the same, but the dynamic had shifted. When the evidence was laid out, not all of it but enough, the change was immediate. The practiced calm fractured, just for a moment, revealing something raw beneath. Denials came faster, less measured. Explanations tangled. The past, once distant, pressed close. Investigators did not push too hard. They didn't need to. The cracks were there. Outside, the community reacted in waves. Some refused to believe, clinging to memories of barbecues and church picnics, of a person they thought they knew. Others felt a grim vindication, a sense that suspicions they had never voiced were finally finding daylight. Social circles fractured along fault lines drawn decades earlier. The phrase cold case solved began to appear in conversations, tentative, almost whispered, as if saying it too loudly might invite disappointment. Legal considerations moved quietly alongside the investigation. Prosecutors reviewed the evidence with the same caution that had been missing in 1983, aware that time complicates everything. Witness reliability, chain of custody. The narrative had to be airtight, not just compelling. The hidden evidence was powerful, but it could not stand alone. It needed context, corroboration, a story that made sense to people who had not lived with this case for most of their lives. As days turned into weeks, the weight of the years became more apparent. Some witnesses could not be found. Others had died. Memories conflicted. Investigators balanced urgency with patience, knowing that rushing could undo everything. Each decision felt amplified by the knowledge that this might be the last chance. The victim deserved more than another false start. The town's atmosphere shifted again when law enforcement confirmed what many had suspected. A suspect had been named. Not charged yet, but named. The announcement was measured, almost restrained, but its impact was immediate. Shock rippled outward, touching everyone differently. For some it was relief, a sense that the endless question mark might finally straighten into a line. For others it was betrayal, the realization that trust had been misplaced for decades. At night, lights burned late in houses where conversations stretched long past bedtime. Old photographs were pulled from drawers, examined for signs that had been missed. People replayed memories, searching for moments that now felt ominous in retrospect. The past became crowded, every interaction suddenly suspect. The town, once defined by its quiet, felt restless, as if the ground itself were shifting. In the cemetery, the victim's grave became a focal point, flowers appearing more frequently, notes tucked beneath stones. The family visited often, standing in silence, letting the reality of movement sink in. Justice was not here yet, but it felt closer than it ever had. That closeness was both comforting and terrifying, because it meant the end of waiting would also mean the beginning of something else. By the end of the second week, the investigation had transformed from a revival into a reckoning. The hidden evidence had not just reopened a file. It had forced a community to confront the idea that the truth had been there all along, overlooked not out of malice but limitation. As investigators prepared their next steps, the town braced itself for what would come next, knowing that whatever the outcome, the story of the Midwest 1983 cold case was no longer frozen in time. It was moving, and movement has consequences. The third week after the evidence surfaced arrived with a different kind of tension, quieter but sharper, the kind that settles into the bones and refuses to leave. The investigation had crossed an invisible line. This was no longer about reopening a file or correcting old assumptions. It was about confronting a version of the past that did not want to be confronted. Every move investigators made now echoed through the town, amplified by decades of silence and the fear of what might finally be said out loud. Inside the station, the walls seemed closer. Maps were taped up again, new pins piercing old paper, timelines redrawn in ink that refused to fade. Detectives worked in overlapping shifts, chasing consistency, looking for the moment where story and evidence finally aligned. They spoke less, listened more. In cold cases, certainty rarely arrives as a single revelation. comes as pressure building slowly until something gives. They returned again and again to the same question. Why now? Why had the evidence been hidden the way it was? The compartment near the grain elevator was no accident. Someone had taken time. Someone had planned. The act itself suggested familiarity, not panic, control rather than chaos. That detail changed everything. This was not a crime committed by a stranger passing through. This was someone who knew the space, knew the town, knew how to disappear into the background afterward. Old maintenance logs revealed patterns that had once seemed meaningless. Certain names appeared more often than others. Certain repairs coincided with gaps in documentation. Investigators followed those threads patiently, aware that patterns do not announce themselves. They reveal themselves only to those willing to look again. Each discovery narrowed the scope, tightening the circle around a small group of people whose lives had intersected with the victims in ways that now felt ominous. The suspect's history was pulled apart piece by piece. Employment records, financial documents, personal relationships. In 1983, nothing about his life had raised alarms. He was steady, reliable, present in the ways small towns value most. That steadiness now took on a different tone. Consistency can be a mask. Investigators noted how often his schedule placed him near the elevator, how frequently his explanations relied on habits rather than specifics. It was not proof, but it was weight. They spoke again to people who had known both men, the victim and the suspect, back when their lives overlapped casually, unremarkably. Some interviews were brief, memories too distant to be useful. Others were unexpectedly vivid. A coworker remembered an argument, small at the time, forgotten almost immediately. A neighbor recalled seeing the two together near the tracks days before the disappearance, a detail dismissed in 1983 because it did not fit the prevailing theories. Now it slid neatly into place like a puzzle piece found under the table years later. The suspect was brought in once more, this time under conditions that made the imbalance clear. The room was the same, but the air was not. When confronted with the growing body of information, he grew defensive, then indignant, then quiet. His denials remained firm, but their edges dulled. Investigators noted the way his gaze drifted when the elevator was mentioned, the way his hands tightened when the hidden compartment was described. These were not confessions. They were tells, small involuntary reactions that spoke louder than words. Outside, the town wrestled with its own reactions. The idea that someone so familiar could be responsible felt like an accusation leveled at everyone. People replayed conversations, gestures, shared meals, searching for signs that might have been there all along. Some found them. Others refused to look. The community split along invisible lines, between those who wanted closure at any cost, and those who feared what closure would require them to accept. Local media tread carefully, aware of the damage careless words could cause. Still, headlines landed hard. Midwest cold case advances. Hidden evidence points to known suspect. Trust, once taken for granted, became a fragile thing. Churches filled more than usual on Sundays, sermons leaning toward forgiveness without naming what needed forgiving. At the diner, conversations stopped when certain people walked in. Silence became its own language. The victim's family remained at the center of the storm, pulled between hope and exhaustion. Investigators kept them informed, not sparing them the complexity. They deserved the truth even when it was messy. They listened, asked questions, absorbed details that would have broken them years earlier. Time had not healed the wound, but it had changed how they carried it. Now, for the first time, they felt the weight shifting, the burden no longer entirely theirs. Forensic specialists revisited every piece of physical evidence from 1983, re-examining it under modern standards. Items once dismissed as irrelevant were scrutinized again. Some yielded nothing. Others offered subtle confirmations that strengthened the emerging narrative. Each small success reinforced the sense that the case had not gone cold because it was unsolvable, but because it had arrived too early. Prosecutors watched closely, their involvement deepening as the investigation solidified. They asked hard questions, challenged assumptions, demanded clarity. A case this old could not survive on implication alone. It needed precision. The hidden evidence was the cornerstone, but the structure built around it had to be sound. Investigators adjusted, refining their approach, aware that the margin for error was thin. As pressure mounted, the suspect's behavior changed. He withdrew from familiar routines, avoided public places, limited contact with old friends. Some interpreted this as guilt. Others saw it as fear, the natural reaction of a man caught in a nightmare not of his making. The ambiguity fed the tension, leaving everyone suspended between competing truths. Late one evening, a break came not from technology but from memory. A witness, long silent, requested a meeting. He was older now, his voice rough with age and hesitation. He spoke of something he had seen near the elevator the night before the body was found, something he had dismissed at the time as none of his business. A vehicle parked where it shouldn't have been. A familiar silhouette moving quickly, deliberately. He had convinced himself it was nothing. Now, with the case alive again, the memory refused to stay buried. The statement was careful, measured, but its impact was immediate. It aligned with the new evidence, reinforcing the timeline investigators had been building. It did not solve the case on its own, but it strengthened the spine of the story. The past was not just speaking through objects anymore. It was speaking through people who had finally decided to listen to themselves. When news of the witness surfaced, the town reacted with a collective intake of breath. This was different. This was human. It made the story harder to dismiss, harder to compartmentalize. The idea that silence had played a role, however unintentional, settled heavily. People wondered what they themselves might have overlooked in their own lives, what truths they had chosen not to examine. The investigation moved closer to its breaking point. Every interview, every document, every late-night discussion carried the sense that the end of the road was visible, even if the exact shape of it remained unclear. The phrase cold case solved hovered closer now, no longer whispered but still not declared. Everyone involved understood the stakes. Solving a case like this does not just identify a perpetrator. It redefines a community's understanding of itself. As the third week drew to a close, investigators gathered to assess what they had. The evidence was compelling, the narrative coherent, the risks undeniable. Outside, the town settled into an uneasy quiet, waiting for the next headline, the next announcement, the next shift in a story that had already changed too much to ever return to what it was. The Midwest 1983 cold case was no longer a ghost story passed down through generations. It was a living reckoning, and it was far from finished. By the time the fourth week arrived, the investigation had acquired a gravity that bent everything around it. Conversations were shorter. Decisions were slower, weighed and reweighed as if each one carried a measurable cost. The station lights stayed on late, not out of urgency alone but out of caution, because everyone understood that momentum could be as dangerous as stagnation. A cold case does not forgive mistakes, and this one had already waited too long. The focus tightened on the spaces between known facts, the gaps where intent and opportunity overlap. Investigators returned to the grain elevator yet again, not to look for new evidence but to test the story against reality. They walked the route from the pickup to the hidden compartment, timing the distance, noting blind spots, listening to how sound traveled. Trucks rumbled past on the nearby road, loud enough to swallow a shout. Wind rattled loose metal, masking footsteps. It was a place where things could happen unseen, unnoticed, especially to someone who knew it well. They mapped the suspect's movements against these observations, aligning work schedules and personal errands with the physical reality of the site. What emerged was a pattern that felt less like coincidence and more like design. The suspect's explanations, once plausible in isolation, now strained under the weight of context. Investigators did not celebrate this realization. They treated it like a fragile artifact, something to be handled carefully, because patterns can mislead as easily as they can illuminate. The legal team pressed for clarity. They wanted a clean line from evidence to action, a narrative that could survive cross-examination and skepticism. They asked why the compartment had been used at all. Why not destroy the items? Why hide them so close to the scene? The answers were not definitive, but they were human. People hide what they cannot let go of. People underestimate time. People believe that familiarity equals invisibility. These explanations did not excuse anything, but they made the story believable in a way that mattered. Another interview added texture rather than revelation. A former coworker, now living states away, remembered a shift change that had gone wrong. A brief confrontation that ended with forced smiles. It had seemed insignificant at the time, just the friction of daily life. When placed alongside other accounts, it suggested motive without naming it outright. Resentment, control, a sense of being wronged. Investigators noted it, careful not to overstate its importance. Motive is often the weakest part of an old case, reconstructed from fragments and hindsight. The suspect was invited in again, this time with counsel present. The tone was formal, restrained. Evidence was presented methodically, not to provoke but to observe. The suspect listened, jaw set, eyes fixed on the table. When asked to explain inconsistencies, he leaned into denial with renewed vigor, insisting the past was being distorted by modern interpretation. His lawyer echoed the sentiment, reminding everyone that memory is unreliable, that science is not infallible, that reasonable doubt grows with time. The room absorbed the argument without reaction. These were expected defenses. They did not change the facts. Outside, the community's patience thinned. Rumors hardened into positions. Some residents demanded an arrest, seeing delay as cowardice or incompetence. Others urged restraint, warning against the irreversible damage of a wrongful charge. The town hall filled for an impromptu meeting, voices rising and falling as people argued over justice and caution. No one mentioned the victim by name at first. When someone finally did, the room fell quiet, the reminder cutting through ideology like a blade. The victim's family stayed mostly out of public view, a deliberate choice. They had learned the cost of being visible. Investigators visited them regularly, updating them on progress and obstacles alike. These meetings were not dramatic. They were steady, grounded in respect. The family asked about timelines, about what would happen next, about whether an arrest meant an end. The answers were honest even when they disappointed. An arrest is not closure. It is a beginning. Behind the scenes, forensic analysts continued to work, refining their findings, strengthening the chain of custody, anticipating challenges that would come if the case moved forward. They reran tests, documented procedures, double-checked logs. The goal was not just accuracy but resilience. Every result needed to withstand the scrutiny of experts who would be paid to dismantle it. This diligence slowed the process, but no one complained. Speed had failed this case once already. A small but significant development emerged from an unexpected place. An old photograph, long overlooked, was digitized and enhanced using modern software. It showed the area near the elevator days before the disappearance, a snapshot taken for unrelated reasons. In the background, partially obscured, was a vehicle matching one associated with the suspect. The image was not definitive. It did not show a face or an act, but it placed the suspect where he claimed not to have been, undermining his certainty. Investigators treated the find cautiously, aware of the dangers of overinterpretation, but they could not ignore its potential. When confronted with the image, the suspect reacted sharply, questioning its authenticity, its relevance, its timing. His lawyer objected, citing the limits of enhancement technology. The exchange grew tense, then abruptly ended. No confession followed. None was expected. What mattered was the cumulative effect, the way each piece pressed against the next, reducing the space for alternative explanations. The media caught wind of the photograph, though details remained sparse. Headlines hinted at new developments, fueling speculation without substance. The sheriff's office issued a brief statement urging patience and discretion. It did little to calm the atmosphere. The town existed in a state of suspended animation, waiting for an official word that refused to come. As days stretched on, investigators revisited the earliest moments of the case, questioning their predecessors' decisions with a humility born of hindsight. They recognized the limitations of 1983, the absence of tools now taken for granted, the cultural assumptions that shaped early conclusions. This was not about assigning blame to those who had tried and failed. It was about understanding how the truth had been missed so it could not be missed again. One evening, after most of the staff had gone home, the lead investigator sat alone with the file, reading it from beginning to end without interruption. He lingered on the original statements, the tentative language, the unresolved questions. He imagined the day the body was found, the confusion, the pressure to provide answers where none were clear. He imagined the years that followed, the slow fading of urgency. The weight of responsibility settled heavily. Solving the case would not erase the lost time, but it might give it meaning. The decision that followed was not dramatic. It did not involve a late-night arrest or flashing lights. It was a consensus reached quietly, methodically. The evidence had reached a threshold where inaction posed its own risk. The legal team agreed. The investigators agreed. The sheriff agreed. The next step would be taken, not because it guaranteed victory, but because it honored the process and the victim equally. Word reached the family first. The conversation was careful, direct. An arrest was imminent. Charges were being prepared. The family listened, absorbing the information with a composure shaped by years of disappointment. They asked for nothing more than honesty. They received it. When the announcement came, it was measured and precise. A suspect had been arrested in connection with the 1983 homicide. The statement avoided triumph. It emphasized evidence, procedure, the presumption of innocence. It acknowledged the decades that had passed without resolution. It did not promise closure. The town heard what it wanted to hear anyway. Shock rippled outward stronger than before. This was no longer speculation. This was action. People gathered in small clusters, phones glowing in the dusk, voices low and urgent. Some cried. Some argued. Some stared at nothing, trying to reconcile memory with reality. The past had crossed into the present with undeniable force. As night settled over the Midwest, the lights at the station burned brighter than usual. Paperwork piled up. Calls came in from outside agencies, from reporters, from people who had waited a lifetime to say, "I told you so," and from others who could only say, "I never imagined." The case had reached a point of no return. And yet, even as the machinery of justice began to turn, the investigators knew that the hardest part still lay ahead. An arrest does not answer every question. It raises new ones. In the silence after the announcement, the town felt the weight of what it had gained and what it might still lose. The Midwest 1983 cold case was no longer frozen, but thawing brings its own kind of danger, and the reckoning was only beginning. The arrest did not bring relief the way people imagine arrests do. It brought noise. It brought a rush of voices, questions, accusations, and half-remembered stories that flooded the town like water through a cracked levee. Squad cars had come and gone quietly, but their absence was louder than their arrival. By morning, the name was everywhere, spoken aloud for the first time with a weight that bent conversations out of shape. Midwest, 1983 cold case. Arrest made. The words looked clean in print and felt jagged in the mouth. Inside the station, the rhythm changed immediately. Phones rang without pause. Reporters requested statements that would not be given. Lawyers called, careful and precise. Investigators moved through hallways with files tucked tight to their chests, aware that every document now had a shadow attached to it. This was no longer an investigation unfolding in relative privacy. It was a public reckoning, and the margin for error had narrowed to almost nothing. The suspect sat alone in a holding room, older than the man described in the original reports, his face marked by time in ways memory could not soften. He stared at the wall as if it might offer him an alternate version of events, one where none of this was happening. His lawyer arrived with a briefcase and a calm that felt rehearsed, immediately asserting rights, immediately drawing boundaries. The system shifted into a different gear, one governed by procedure rather than pursuit. Investigators did not press for a confession. They had learned long ago that desperation produces mistakes. Instead, they focused on fortifying what they already had, converting momentum into structure. Every piece of evidence was revisited again, not to question its validity but to anticipate how it would be attacked. The hidden compartment, the forensic results, the witness statements old and new. Each element was scrutinized for weakness, because a case like this invites scrutiny the way light invites insects. The prosecutor assigned to the case approached it with visible restraint. There was no celebration in her office, no sense of victory. She had seen cold cases collapse under the weight of their own expectations, juries unmoved by science they did not fully trust, defense attorneys turning the passage of time into a weapon. She wanted clarity, not drama. She wanted to know how each fact connected, how each connection would survive doubt. The first formal interview after the arrest was brief and tightly controlled. The suspect answered few questions, deferring to counsel, his voice steady but thin. He denied everything without elaboration. insisting the past was being rewritten by people who needed a villain. Investigators noted the language. Rewritten. Needed. These were not the words of someone confused by events. They were the words of someone resisting a narrative forming without his consent. Outside, the town processed the news unevenly. Some people felt vindicated, their long-held suspicions finally validated by action. Others felt blindsided, betrayed by the idea that someone they had trusted, laughed with, stood beside at school events and funerals, could be connected to something so violent. The arrest forced everyone to choose between memory and evidence, and that choice did not come easily. Social spaces became tense. At the grocery store, glances lingered too long. At the diner, tables rearranged themselves, familiar groups subtly shifting to avoid confrontation. People spoke in lowered voices, as if the truth might be listening. The phrase innocent until proven guilty appeared frequently, often spoken by those who needed it most. Equally frequent was the unspoken thought that innocence had been assumed once already, and look where that had led. The victim's family received the news with a careful stillness. They had imagined this moment for decades, but imagination had not prepared them for its complexity. Relief mixed with grief, hope tangled with anger. An arrest did not return what had been taken. It did not answer every question that had lived with them for most of their lives. But it did something important. It acknowledged that what happened mattered enough to pursue, even after all this time. They were asked if they wished to make a statement. They declined. Words felt inadequate. Investigators respected the decision. Silence in this case was not avoidance. It was control. As the case moved toward arraignment, defense strategy began to surface in fragments. The reliability of forensic methods, the contamination of evidence, the danger of confirmation bias in reopened investigations. These arguments were not surprising, but they were effective in shaping public perception. Doubt crept back in, subtle and persistent. The town had waited decades for movement. Now it waited again, this time for validation. A preliminary hearing was scheduled, and with it came the first real test of the case's resilience. In the courtroom, the past and present collided under fluorescent lights. The suspect stood, expression unreadable, while the charges were read. The words echoed, formal and precise, carrying the weight of a life interrupted in 1983. He entered a plea of not guilty. No gasps followed. Everyone had expected it. Witnesses were not called yet, but the outlines of the case were sketched in careful language. The hidden evidence, the forensic link, the renewed investigation. The judge listened, impassive, then set dates and conditions with the efficiency of someone who had seen this before. The machinery moved forward, indifferent to the emotions attached to it. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Statements were issued that said little and meant much. The prosecutor emphasized evidence and patience. The defense emphasized presumption and time. Both sides understood the audience extended far beyond the courtroom. This case was not just about one death. It was about trust in institutions, in science, in memory itself. Back at the station, investigators felt a shift they had not anticipated. The adrenaline that had fueled the reopening began to drain, replaced by a quieter, heavier responsibility. Their role was no longer to discover the truth, but to protect it, to ensure it survived the adversarial process ahead. They reviewed reports with fresh eyes, correcting language that could be misinterpreted, clarifying timelines that might confuse a jury unfamiliar with the town's geography. One investigator returned to the original scene alone late one evening, standing near the elevator as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the gravel. He imagined the night as it might have been, the choices made in moments that would ripple across decades. He did not feel satisfaction. He felt gravity. Solving a cold case does not erase the harm. It exposes it fully. The defense requested additional testing, additional reviews, additional time. The prosecution agreed where it could, understanding that transparency now was an investment in credibility later. The process slowed again deliberately. For some in the town, the delay felt like betrayal. For others, it was reassurance that the case would not be rushed to satisfy public hunger. Meanwhile, the witness who had come forward late grappled with his own visibility. He had not anticipated the attention, the scrutiny, the quiet judgment of neighbors wondering why he had waited so long. Investigators checked on him regularly, offering support without pressure. His testimony mattered, but so did his well-being. Cold cases consume more than facts. They consume people. As weeks passed, the narrative began to harden. Lines were drawn. Opinions calcified. Some residents spoke openly of guilt, citing the evidence as if it were already verdict. Others clung to doubt, pointing to the decades of normalcy that had followed the crime. The town existed in a state of suspended argument, waiting for the trial to tell it what to believe. Through it all, the victim remained a presence rather than a headline. Investigators made a point of using the name, of describing the life interrupted rather than the death alone. They remembered the person who had left home that morning in 1983, expecting to return. That memory anchored the case when politics and speculation threatened to pull it apart. By the end of the fifth phase of the reopened investigation, it was clear that the arrest had not closed the book. It had opened a heavier chapter, one written not just in evidence but in consequence. The Midwest 1983 cold case had moved from mystery to confrontation, from silence to testimony. The truth was no longer hidden, but it was not yet settled. And in the space between accusation and judgment, the town waited, holding its breath, knowing that whatever came next would redefine what justice meant after all these years. The sixth week carried a different weight entirely. The arrest had shifted the town's atmosphere, turning familiar streets into corridors of whispered speculation. Every passerby, every glance seemed to carry hidden meaning. Shopkeepers recognized the same worried expressions in their customers, the same cautious questions about the case, the same subtle avoidance of certain topics. The Midwest 1983 cold case had evolved from a memory into a living tension that refused to dissipate. Investigators returned to the scene repeatedly, retracing paths, re-examining the hidden compartment. Each visit felt like a negotiation with the past, an attempt to extract clarity from years of absence. Shadows had shifted over time. Rust and rot had changed angles. What once seemed empty now held context. The hidden compartment, once merely a container of overlooked objects, had become the focal point of the case, a silent witness to human behavior, planning, and deception. The smallest detail, the scratch on the wood, the smudge on metal, was examined as though it could speak, as though it carried testimony in the way a voice never could. The suspect's behavior remained opaque. He followed advice from his attorney, avoided social spaces, and limited communication. But he could not hide from observation entirely. Investigators noted subtle cues, micro-expressions, hesitations, a tightened jaw, a fleeting glance that suggested unease. None of these were proof, none were admission, but they were threads in the fabric of narrative, strands that, when woven together, began to resemble a shape the investigators had been chasing for decades. Witnesses became reluctant participants in a process they had not anticipated. The man who had come forward before struggled with fear of retribution, fear of attention, fear of being wrong. Investigators reassured him, verified his safety, and documented his memories meticulously. Every word was weighed, every pause noted. In cold cases, time twists perception. Memory is fragile. What he had recalled was not just fact but the emotional residue of an event long suppressed. His testimony would be crucial, but it also reminded everyone that the past does not yield easily. The legal process added layers of complexity. Prosecutors worked methodically, constructing timelines that were unbroken by assumptions. Defense attorneys probed relentlessly, highlighting inconsistencies, questioning methodologies, suggesting that decades of faded memory and evolving technology could produce error as easily as clarity. Investigators accommodated these challenges without faltering, reinforcing every detail, checking and rechecking, aware that the outcome depended on the resilience of what they had discovered, not on speculation. Community tension intensified as rumors circulated. Some residents called for immediate conviction, convinced that justice had finally arrived. Others demanded caution, fearing that decades of distance could distort perception and judgment. Conversations in the diner, at grocery stores, in church pews were cautious, fractured by fear of saying the wrong thing. Silence became a language in itself, a way to negotiate daily life in a town where history had just returned with a new and frightening presence. Investigators pursued new avenues as well. Old photographs were re-examined, Records long filed away were pulled and analyzed. Employment logs, maintenance reports, even simple grocery receipts were cross-referenced. Patterns emerged, subtle and tentative, but increasingly consistent. These patterns were not just about the suspect. They revealed interactions, coincidences, and choices that, in 1983, had been invisible. Understanding them now required imagination, persistence, and a deep respect for the way small details accumulate over decades. Inside the station, the pressure was constant. Files accumulated. Whiteboards were filled with connections, names, timelines. Each edition brought new insights but also new questions. Investigators worked in overlapping shifts, ensuring continuity, ensuring that nothing would be lost to fatigue or oversight. They were aware that the smallest lapse could unravel months of work, that a single misinterpreted document could jeopardize the painstaking structure they had built. Forensics remained a pillar of the case. Items once considered irrelevant were reanalyzed with modern techniques. Fibers, soil samples, trace elements, all were examined with precision unavailable to investigators in 1983. Some samples confirmed suspicions, others surprised. Every result was scrutinized for consistency, every anomaly considered for its possible significance. The science itself carried weight. It was not perfect, but it was precise enough to lend credibility in the face of decades-old doubt. The victim's family lived in a suspended state, their lives once again intertwined with a process that offered both hope and stress. Every update from investigators brought new waves of emotion: anticipation, dread, relief, and exhaustion. The arrest had brought clarity, but it had not replaced the silence and absence they had carried for years. Their grief had changed shape. It had become a companion to cautious hope, a constant presence even as progress was made. Media attention grew, intensifying the scrutiny on both the town and the case. Reporters sought interviews, tried to extract emotion and narrative, but investigators maintained control. Public statements were precise, emphasizing procedure, evidence, and the presumption of innocence. The balance was delicate. Too much openness could compromise the case, too little could fuel suspicion. The press became a shadow participant in the unfolding story, shaping perception without shaping fact. The suspect, despite legal counsel and careful planning, could not fully escape observation. Subtle movements, patterns of avoidance, fleeting expressions, all were noted, all were analyzed. The investigators were patient, understanding that impatience often leads to error, that pressure must be sustained and measured. They knew that the past had been patient for decades. It had waited silently, unseen, and now demanded methodical attention in return. Conversations among investigators grew increasingly philosophical. What is justice after 30 years? How much can evidence reconstruct truth? How does memory, human error, and evolving technology affect the pursuit of resolution? These questions were not mere rhetoric. They informed daily decisions, shaped strategy, and ensured that the process did not collapse under its own emotional weight. The cold case demanded both rigor and restraint. By the end of the 6th week, the narrative of the case had begun to solidify. Connections once tenuous were strengthened by corroboration. Witness statements aligned more consistently with physical evidence. Patterns of behavior that had seemed isolated now formed a coherent picture. The investigation, once a tentative reopening, had become an unrelenting forward motion, a convergence of decades-old facts and new insights. And yet, even with momentum, investigators knew the fragility of the situation. A single overlooked detail, a misinterpreted memory, or a legal misstep could undermine years of painstaking work. Cold cases carry the weight of history, the inertia of forgotten truths, and the relentless scrutiny of modern standards. This one was no exception. Every step forward was measured, deliberate, and exacting. Outside, the town continued to hold its collective breath. Conversations were careful, judgments tentative, opinions hardened and shifted in the same instant. People watched for signs, for confirmation, for resolution. Some looked for closure, others for vindication, and a few for distraction from the discomfort of memory. The 1983 Midwest cold case had become more than an investigation. It had become a lens through which the town examined itself, its trust, and its own complicity in silence. Investigators spent late nights cross-referencing witness statements with physical evidence, reconciling minor discrepancies, and fortifying the narrative for the scrutiny to come. Every timeline was reconstructed, every account compared against weather reports, vehicle logs, and employment records. It was painstaking work but necessary. Accuracy would be the difference between truth and assumption, between justice and failure. The hidden compartment continued to draw attention. Small details revealed themselves under new analysis. A faint fingerprint previously overlooked, a minor disturbance in the dust of decades-old surfaces. These were not dramatic discoveries, but incremental confirmations that strengthened the case's spine. In cold cases, it is rarely a single revelation that leads to resolution. It is the accumulation of countless small truths that tip the scales. By week's end, investigators reviewed the entire timeline again. They compared notes with forensic experts, legal teams, and lead detectives. Consensus was emerging. The narrative was coherent, the evidence credible, the path forward clear. There were risks, but the risks were calculable. This was not just a victory for procedure. It was a reclamation of history, a statement that even decades-old silence cannot bury the truth forever. The town remained tense, aware that the final chapters of this story were approaching. Conversations shifted to speculation about the trial, about potential testimony, about the impact on community relations. People argued, predicted, and reassessed. The Midwest 1983 cold case was no longer abstract. It had a face, a timeline, and a name. And yet, the full measure of consequence had yet to reveal itself. The sixth week closed with investigators reviewing their progress quietly, methodically. The momentum had changed the case from a historical mystery into an immediate reality. The arrest was only the beginning. Trial testimony and scrutiny would follow. Every decision made now would echo far beyond the station walls. And in the stillness of the night, the investigators understood that the past they had summoned would not allow itself to be contained again. It demanded confrontation, demanded resolution, demanded truth, and they were prepared to follow it wherever it led. The seventh week began with an uneasy quiet, the kind that follows a storm yet carries tension in every shadow. The town seemed still, but beneath the surface currents shifted. Conversations at the diner were hushed, punctuated by glances at newcomers, strangers, reporters in town for the first time since the arrest. The Midwest 1983 cold case had transformed from memory into an omnipresent weight, pressing on every interaction, every routine. People moved differently, measured their words, calculated their silences. Trust had fractured, suspicion grew, and history hung like a low ceiling over the streets. Investigators returned to the elevator site at dawn, before anyone else could witness their presence. The wind rattled the metal siding, carrying echoes of old machinery and distant highways. Footprints long faded had left impressions in dirt now hardened by years, yet investigators studied each surface, each angle, imagining movements, calculating distances. The hidden compartment remained a focal point, a silent repository of memory and intent. Every small imperfection in its structure, every residue, every fingerprint that survived decades became part of a growing mosaic of evidence. Forensic teams worked tirelessly in parallel. DNA tests that once lacked precision now returned definitive results. Fibers, hairs, and trace elements were compared with samples preserved in archival freezers. Even the smallest anomaly, a smudge, a partial print, a dust particle, was considered in the context of the whole. Each confirmation reinforced the timeline. Each anomaly prompted deeper scrutiny. Cold cases demand both patience and precision, and in this phase, every detail mattered more than ever. The suspect's demeanor remained calculated. He sat in his small, controlled environment, monitoring news coverage with a careful eye, aware of every utterance about his name. He spoke sparingly to investigators, words chosen with care, tone measured, eyes fixed. The attorneys reminded the team repeatedly of rights, obligations, and the dangers of presumption. The suspect offered nothing that could be used as admission, yet the investigators noticed subtle cracks. A flicker of hesitation, a brief downward glance, a change in breathing. Nothing definitive, but a language of tension that investigators had learned to read over decades. Witnesses became critical yet fragile instruments in the case. One former coworker, who had previously withheld details out of fear, agreed to provide testimony under strict protection. His recollection, vague in some areas but consistent in others, began to reveal small but significant contradictions in the suspect's story. Investigators documented every nuance, every pause, every inflection. Memory in cold cases is a tricky terrain. It is a map drawn after the fact, yet it can expose hidden paths if navigated carefully. The community's anxiety deepened. The arrest had been public, but the courtroom proceedings were about to bring the past into sharper focus. People speculated on every minor detail. Who knew what, when, and why they had said nothing? Small towns remember everything. Yet selective memory colors perception. The sense of betrayal lingered like smoke, thick and pervasive. Old alliances strained. Friendships fractured under the weight of suspicion. Some residents sought solace in religion, some in family, others in the comfort of silence. Investigators coordinated closely with legal teams to ensure the evidence would withstand trial scrutiny. For every piece of forensic data, there was a narrative explanation. Why it mattered, how it linked to the suspect, why it had been overlooked for decades. Chain of custody was reinforced at every stage. Every report was verified, cross-checked, and double-checked. The cold case, once dormant, had awakened with rigorous vigilance, and the investigators were determined not to let the past slip away again. A breakthrough emerged unexpectedly when a former friend of the suspect came forward, prompted by media coverage. He recalled a minor incident, long forgotten but significant when contextualized within the investigation. The details seemed trivial on their own. A tool borrowed, a vehicle parked unusually. But when aligned with other evidence, they revealed patterns of behavior that had previously gone unnoticed. Investigators treated the testimony with care, verifying its accuracy without imposing interpretation. The accumulation of these small truths was steadily constructing a coherent narrative. The suspect's legal strategy evolved as well. The defense questioned the validity of the old evidence, the reliability of memory, and the potential for misinterpretation of decades-old forensic analysis. They argued that public pressure had shaped recollection, that expectations influenced observation. The investigators anticipated these arguments and reinforced their documentation accordingly. Every detail mattered, from the precise wording of witness statements to the chronology of minor events. Cold cases are as much about procedure as discovery. Missteps could undo decades of work. Community reactions remained volatile. Some saw the impending trial as the first real step toward closure. Others feared it might exacerbate divisions. Local media amplified every nuance, creating a narrative of suspense and moral reckoning. Conversations in households and social spaces reflected a mixture of excitement, fear, and anticipation. People speculated about testimony, motives, and the eventual outcome. The town existed in suspended judgment, caught between the certainty of evidence and the ambiguity of human behavior. Back in the station, investigators reviewed each day's findings in meticulous detail. They compared witness statements to physical evidence, cross-referenced logs, and reconciled discrepancies. Every step was taken with precision to avoid error and to prepare for challenges in court. The cumulative weight of decades of unresolved questions required not just persistence but disciplined method. A single miscalculation could jeopardize the delicate balance between fact and assumption. The victim's family remained cautiously engaged. Visits from investigators provided updates and context. Yet no one pretended that the passage of decades had lessened the emotional burden. Each new revelation reopened old wounds. Yet the family's resilience became part of the investigative process. They provided clarity, corroborated timelines, and offered insight into the victim's character, reminding everyone that behind the evidence was a person whose life had been unjustly taken. Technology continued to assist where human memory faltered. Enhanced photographs, environmental reconstructions, and digital overlays provided insight into the suspect's movements, positioning, and opportunity. Each technological advancement was carefully documented, ensuring its admissibility and reliability in court. The integration of modern science into a decades-old case highlighted both the limitations and possibilities of forensic investigation, turning previously overlooked elements into critical evidence. As the seventh week drew to a close, the investigation reached a crucial stage. Evidence had been consolidated, witness statements aligned, and patterns of behavior fully reconstructed. The narrative had moved from theory to actionable clarity. Investigators and legal teams alike recognized that they were on the precipice of a historic trial, the first time in over 35 years that the Midwest 1983 cold case would be examined not in isolation but under the intense scrutiny of the judicial system. The town, for its part, braced for the inevitable. Streets, diners, and town halls buzzed with conversation, speculation, and apprehension. Old memories clashed with new perceptions. People remembered who they had been in 1983, who they had trusted, and who now stood accused. The convergence of time, evidence, and accountability was reshaping the social fabric in subtle, sometimes uncomfortable ways. Inside the station, investigators paused for a moment of reflection. The progress was real, tangible, but the stakes had never been higher. They had uncovered patterns, identified inconsistencies, and fortified their case with modern methods, but the trial would be the ultimate test. The cold case, once dormant, had reasserted itself with a force that demanded complete diligence. Every step taken in the coming days could alter the course of justice, perception, and community memory. And yet, even amid preparation and scrutiny, a persistent thought lingered. 35 years had passed, countless lives had shifted, and one act of violence had reverberated endlessly. The trial was imminent, but resolution was not guaranteed. The Midwest 1983 cold case had awakened, exposing old truths, new anxieties, and the enduring challenge of reconciling the past with the present. In every shadow of the town, in every pause of conversation, the weight of history was palpable, demanding attention, demanding justice, and refusing to be ignored. The eighth week unfolded under a tense, simmering quiet. The town seemed to move in slow motion, each day stretching long and heavy with anticipation. The arrest had altered the rhythms of daily life. People walked the streets with guarded eyes, spoke in hushed tones, and avoided familiar corners where memories lingered. Midwest 1983 cold case. 3 decades of silence now exploded into the present. It was impossible to ignore, impossible to pretend it had never happened. The air was thick with speculation, fear, and a gnawing curiosity that tugged at everyone's attention. Investigators returned to the scene once more, tracing movements and footprints that had long since faded. The elevator shaft, now aged and slightly warped by weather, held subtle clues that modern technology could capture. Shadows where fingerprints had faded, dust patterns that hinted at prior activity, and faint abrasions that aligned with witness testimony. Every detail mattered. Every observation was cross-checked. The hidden compartment remained central, a small silent monument to choices made decades ago. Dust, residue, and forgotten objects all told stories investigators had learned to read. Forensics pushed forward relentlessly. DNA analysis confirmed minute connections that had previously seemed improbable. Fibers, traces of hair, and soil samples were examined with methods unavailable in the 1980s. Each new confirmation strengthened the timeline. Each anomaly prompted deeper scrutiny. Cold cases thrive on persistence, not luck. Investigators knew that while evidence does not lie, interpretation can falter. Their focus remained absolute, their patience unwavering. The suspect remained unreadable. He attended meetings with lawyers, following instructions meticulously, maintaining a composed exterior. But subtle cues betrayed tension. Micro-gestures, slight tics, fleeting glances that hinted at unease. Nothing could be used as definitive proof, yet investigators observed, catalogued, and analyzed. Years of experience taught them that behavior speaks when words remain silent, that the past leaves fingerprints not only on objects but on the psyche. Witnesses navigated a precarious landscape. The former co-worker, who had previously withheld details, now elaborated on observations long buried. Memories were fragmented but consistent. Every nuance documented, every hesitation recorded. Investigators understood the fragility of memory, the distortions of time, and treated each recollection with respect and rigor. The challenge was to build coherence from human imperfection, to align past experiences with present evidence in a way that the courtroom could understand and trust. Community tension escalated. The arrest had lifted a lid on decades-old suspicion. Conversations in homes, cafes, and churches were cautious, fragmented, tinged with fear. People questioned who had known what, why it had been hidden, and how much of their perception had been shaped by false trust. Some demanded swift justice, Others warned against presumption. Old alliances fractured quietly. Friendships strained under the invisible pressure of judgment. The town itself had become a living extension of the case, each resident an unintentional participant in the unfolding drama. Investigators coordinated meticulously with prosecutors. Every piece of forensic data was contextualized and reinforced with narrative. Witness statements were cross-referenced, timelines validated, and all documents reviewed for precision. Any gap, any ambiguity could be exploited by defense. The arrest had ignited public attention, but the trial required structure, rigor, and absolute attention to detail. Cold cases demand both discovery and discipline. Mistakes can be fatal. The suspect's legal team began framing their defense with care. They highlighted the fragility of long-term memory, questioned the integrity of decades-old evidence, and suggested that the investigation's reopening might be influenced by confirmation bias. They painted the narrative as one driven by social pressure, not justice. Investigators anticipated these arguments, ensuring documentation, timelines, and evidence were airtight. Every word mattered, every sequence verified. Precision would determine whether decades of pursuit could withstand scrutiny. Social dynamics grew increasingly complicated. Residents speculated openly, silently, and in ways that shifted from day to day. Some believed in guilt, others in innocence. Some questioned the motivations of witnesses, the reliability of memory, the thoroughness of investigators. Public perception became an ecosystem of its own, influencing conversations, shaping expectations, and amplifying tension. The Midwest 1983 cold case had become a lens through which the community examined itself, trust, and the limits of collective memory. At the station, investigators worked long hours, analyzing interviews, reviewing forensic reports, and ensuring every piece of evidence was fully understood. Technology assisted, but human judgment remained central. Photographs were enhanced, digital reconstructions mapped movements, and patterns of behavior were charted. Small anomalies were investigated rigorously, every possibility considered. Cold cases rarely hinge on dramatic revelations. They rely on the painstaking assembly of small, verifiable truths. The victim's family remained under careful guidance from investigators. They received updates and support, balancing grief with the cautious hope that justice might finally be realized. Each new detail was heavy with emotion. Each development reopened old wounds while nudging them toward resolution. The family's cooperation, clarity, and willingness to share memories provided not just emotional depth but practical guidance in reconstructing timelines and understanding character. The investigation was as much about people as evidence. Media coverage intensified. Local journalists, out-of-town correspondents, and online platforms amplified every movement, every statement, every minor revelation. Investigators maintained control, carefully framing public messaging to protect the integrity of the case. Transparency was balanced against risk, and information was shared in measured doses. The court of public opinion watched and judged, but investigators knew that only the legal process would determine final judgment. The eighth week also revealed cracks in the suspect's behavior. Despite careful counsel and outward composure, micro-expressions betrayed emotion. Tightened jaw, sudden shifts in posture, repeated glances at documents. Investigators cataloged each instance, noting context, timing, and pattern. Though these could not be used as evidence of guilt directly, they contributed to understanding behavior, mindset, and responses under pressure, a critical aspect when constructing a narrative for trial. The accumulation of new testimony, forensic reconfirmation, and behavioral observation began to coalesce into a more coherent picture. Investigators revisited timelines, rechecked prior statements, and reinforced links between seemingly minor incidents and central elements of the case. Small details, missed phone calls, coincidental sightings, overlooked receipts, gained significance in this new, sharper frame. Cold cases unfold like a mosaic. Fragments scattered across decades, but when aligned correctly, form a definitive image. Community tension remained a constant undercurrent. Some embraced hope for justice, others feared consequences, and a few were paralyzed by the resurfacing of long-buried memories. Trust within the town had eroded subtly over decades. Now it strained visibly under renewed scrutiny. Conversations were measured, gestures cautious, and friendships tested. People seemed to navigate an invisible web of past and present, aware that one misstep could draw attention or suspicion. Investigators worked in parallel, maintaining an organized, relentless rhythm. Evidence review, witness coordination, forensic analysis, and legal strategy were synchronized to ensure accuracy and resilience. Each day's conclusion brought meticulous documentation, cross-referencing, and validation. The weight of 35 years of unresolved questions made precision not just desirable but essential. As the 8th week drew to a close, the trajectory of the case was clear. It would proceed to trial. Evidence had been meticulously collected, corroborated, and presented in a coherent narrative. Witnesses had been secured, forensic results verified, and legal strategy reinforced. The past had been meticulously summoned and aligned with the present. The Midwest 1983 cold case was no longer an abstract memory. It had been resurrected in full clarity, ready for confrontation under the law. Yet even as momentum built, investigators understood the fragility of resolution. Trials are unpredictable. Human judgment is imperfect. Emotion can distort perception. Despite years of careful work, they remained vigilant, knowing that the final outcome depended on the precise alignment of evidence, testimony, and procedure. The past had awakened, but it demanded rigorous accountability to shape the future. The town held its collective breath. Streets, homes, and public spaces seemed to hum with anticipation. Residents speculated, feared, and waited. Each conversation, each reflection, was filtered through the lens of decades-old events now exposed anew. The arrest had been just the first step. Now the weight of history pressed against every moment, every interaction, and every expectation. Justice, perception, and memory intertwined, forming an intricate, delicate web that demanded attention, care, and unwavering focus. Investigators, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and the community itself stood at the edge of revelation. The evidence was solid, the narrative coherent, yet the human element remained unpredictable. The Midwest 1983 cold case had traveled decades in silence, and now, in the 8th week of renewed attention, it demanded confrontation, clarity, and resolution. The final chapters had yet to be written, but the momentum was unstoppable, and the truth, painstakingly reconstructed, was ready to face judgment. The 9th week settled in like a dense fog over the town, thick with anticipation, thick with tension. It was a quiet that wasn't quiet at all, a silence laced with scrutiny. People moved through their routines with careful precision, eyes scanning for signs, ears listening for whispers, conversations clipped and cautious. The Midwest 1983 cold case had transformed from a memory into a living, breathing presence in every hallway, every corner, every unspoken thought. The streets seemed narrower, the shadows longer, and even the familiar creak of the diner floorboards carried with it a hint of unease. Investigators returned to the central locations once more. Every surface, every artifact, every detail was examined as if the decades had not dulled its significance. The hidden compartment had long been a focus, but now other aspects demanded attention: the positioning of objects, the layering of dust, the subtleties of wear and tear. Even the floors spoke a language of movement. The walls whispered traces of past activity. Modern imaging techniques revealed impressions previously invisible to the human eye. Dust particles, scratches, minute smudges. Each was scrutinized. Each was cataloged. Each became a thread in the unraveling story of the crime. Forensics continued to yield revelations, though subtle. DNA testing of previously dormant evidence uncovered traces of interaction that aligned with the suspect's timeline. Fibers from clothing, remnants of soil from shoes, traces of a substance long dismissed, all were analyzed with meticulous care. Each finding reinforced other observations, corroborated witness statements, and strengthened the structural integrity of the case. In cold cases, victory rarely comes in a single strike. It comes from the patient layering of incremental truths, each one placing the investigation closer to clarity. The suspect's behavior remained carefully measured, yet increasingly fragile. Small deviations from routine, subtle reactions to questions, fleeting moments of distraction or irritation, they were all noted. Investigators documented these micro-expressions with methodical rigor. Though nothing could be used in court as a direct confession, behavioral analysis provided critical context, insight into intent, and a framework for interpreting responses. Over decades, investigators had learned to read the invisible language of tension, a language composed of microgestures, pauses, and fleeting eye contact. Witnesses now navigated a complex network of interviews, protection measures, and emotional strain. Memories were revisited, clarified, and cross-referenced. One particular witness recalled a minor but pivotal exchange, a conversation about an object misplaced, a vehicle parked unusually, an offhand remark that aligned with previously collected forensic evidence. Investigators treated these recollections as pieces of a puzzle, verifying consistency, cross-referencing with documented events, and mapping them into the larger timeline. Small details carried weight. Decades of silence had not diminished their significance. The community's mood oscillated between anticipation and dread. Some residents clung to hope for resolution, convinced that justice would finally prevail. Others feared the ramifications, the possibility that long-buried truths could upend carefully constructed perceptions of neighbors, friends, and family. Conversations were layered with caution, speculation, and suppressed anxiety. Even casual greetings were tempered by awareness of the ongoing legal process. The cold case had evolved into a prism through which every relationship, every trust, and every shared history was examined anew. Legal preparations intensified. Prosecutors scrutinized every piece of evidence, aligning timelines, ensuring the chain of custody, confirming the validity of modern forensic analysis against older records. Defense attorneys probed for gaps, inconsistencies, or opportunities to challenge interpretation. Investigators remained precise and vigilant, aware that the stakes could not be overstated. Years of accumulated evidence, painstakingly documented, would now face the rigorous scrutiny of the courtroom, where human perception and interpretation would be tested alongside scientific certainty. Media presence grew, amplifying public attention and community anxiety. Reporters sought insight, narrative, and drama, while investigators carefully managed disclosures to protect both the integrity of the case and the privacy of witnesses and the victim's family. Public perception became a secondary field of analysis. How would news coverage shape opinion? How would conversations in homes, workplaces, and public spaces influence memory and testimony? In cold cases, social context can be as impactful as physical evidence, shaping the environment in which justice must ultimately be administered. Inside the station, investigators worked long hours, reviewing previous interviews, analyzing emerging evidence, and coordinating with legal teams. Every document, photograph, and forensic report was scrutinized. Analysts re-examined witness statements, checked timelines against weather records, employment logs, and social calendars. Patterns emerged. Small but consistent alignments that reinforced prior conclusions. Every anomaly was revisited, every minor discrepancy explained or accounted for. The painstaking attention to detail was both exhausting and essential. The smallest misstep could jeopardize decades of labor. The victim's family remained emotionally engaged yet cautious. Each update was heavy with anticipation and sorrow. Memories long suppressed surfaced as new revelations unfolded. The arrest and subsequent investigation reopened old grief, layered now with the tension of trial preparation. Yet the family's participation was invaluable. They provided context, personal insight, and corroboration of timelines and behaviors. Their perspective humanized the evidence, reminding all involved that behind the cold facts was a life taken, a future stolen, and a community forever altered. The suspect's legal strategy continued to evolve. Arguments focused on the reliability of long-term memory, the potential for contamination in old evidence, and the influence of modern forensic technology on historical interpretation. Investigators anticipated these challenges, reinforcing documentation, timelines, and correlations among witness statements, physical evidence, and forensic analysis. Every narrative thread was scrutinized for coherence and completeness. Cold cases demand this dual attention, to uncover the truth and to defend it against the inevitable scrutiny of the judicial process. The 8th and 9th weeks saw subtle but critical breakthroughs. Previously overlooked connections between minor witnesses and incidental observations emerged as crucial links. A casual comment about a vehicle, a brief description of a tool, a forgotten remark about an unexpected visitor, all were recontextualized under modern analysis. Investigators methodically integrated these fragments into the larger narrative, revealing behavioral patterns and timelines that had previously seemed disjointed. Cold cases unfold like layered maps. Only when disparate points are connected does the full landscape emerge. Community dynamics remained delicate. Old suspicions resurfaced, friendships were questioned, and past alliances were reassessed. People navigated social interactions with an awareness that even casual conversations might have unintended consequences. Silence, speculation, and observation became unspoken currencies. The town itself was a participant in the investigation, a social organism shaped by memory, rumor, and unfolding events. Every interaction carried weight. Every gesture was interpreted through the lens of suspicion or anticipation. Investigators held late-night strategy sessions, reviewing evidence, refining arguments, and coordinating with the prosecution team. Each session reinforced clarity, precision, and cohesion. The alignment of witness testimony with forensic analysis, the integration of historical and modern evidence, and the careful mapping of timelines ensured that the case was robust against challenge. Every step was deliberate, every action calculated. The past demanded rigor and patience. Forensics continued to surprise, albeit subtly. Reanalysis of environmental samples yielded additional correlations. Traces of materials from the suspect's environment matched those at the scene in ways previously overlooked. Even faint patterns of movement indicated proximity or interaction. These findings did not stand alone but strengthened a composite picture, a narrative that investigators meticulously built piece by piece. Cold cases rarely hinge on dramatic single discoveries. They rely on the cumulative power of incremental verification. By the end of the 9th week, the investigation had matured into a comprehensive, interconnected narrative. Witness testimony, forensic evidence, behavioral observation, and technological analysis formed a coherent framework. Patterns of movement, opportunity, and interaction align with precision. The cold case, once dormant for 35 years, now existed fully in the present, its trajectory directed toward trial, confrontation, and potential resolution. Yet despite the progress, investigators remained vigilant. Trials are unpredictable, and human perception is variable. The combination of historical memory,